Hi guys, it's Phoebe. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to be talking about not just From Blood and Ash, but really the whole series, or at least the whole series so far, because I have a lot of issues with it. So let's jump right into it. And so I'm not really sure where to begin on this, if I should start with the things that are bigger issues and work my way down. I guess I'll start with the biggest issues throughout the series. Writing overall terrible. Yeah, there's just not a lot going on. There's a lot of dots, a lot of repeated phrases, not very original, not very well done. Also, the plot overall, really, what plot? Book 2 in particular, Kingdom of Flesh and Fire, literally has no plot. This book starts, the plot of this book is that the characters are trying to get from one city to another, and it takes them this entire book to do it, and those cities aren't even that far apart. And then unfortunately, the parts of the book that do have plot, it still doesn't really make sense, which I guess brings me to one of the points that I really wanted to complain about for this book, is that there are so many different levels of beings or creatures, and for me at least, it was impossible to keep up with them. I don't even really know what makes the Atlanteans different than the mortal humans, but the Atlanteans can make vampires, which is another thing I don't understand. Vampires are basically just vampires. So if you're gonna give them a name that's pretty much just vampire, just call them vampire. It's fine. You don't have to come up with a new name for something that is a creature we all have a pretty good grasp on, like as a society. You can say vampire and we know what you mean. You don't have to say vampire to pretend you made up a new word for something that has existed in the lexicon for centuries. Besides vampires, there's also Craven, and Ascended, I think, are not vampires, or maybe Ascended is vampires. This is what I'm saying. There's so many different like words for things. And then as you get farther into the series and you get to hear more about gods, obviously I should say blanket spoiler alert for these 4 books. I really can't rant about them without giving away details of the story. But when she starts to get more into the gods and stuff of this world building, it just gets so much worse, because there's gods, but then there's primals that are more powerful than gods, and then there are demis, which are basically gods but are evil somehow, so they're not really gods. And then you have all these different like kinds of shifters that are not quite the same as the Atlanteans. And like I said, vampires is one of them already, but she also has wolven, which are basically werewolves, and drakens, which are shapeshifters that shift into dragons. But she can't call them dragons because, of course, that would be too obvious. So she changed it slightly and calls them drakens instead. Basically, everything in this book is just stolen from other fantasy stories, realms, worlds, whatever, and she's kind of twisted it just the slightest to try to make it more original. That actually ended up covering a lot of points that I had. So after that, I guess I will mention the really almost racist and almost homophobic issues with the story. So there are definitely 2 POC in this series. One of them is the main male interest, his best friend. His name is Kieran, and he's black, and Kieran is Irish for black, so she named her black character Black. And then the main female character, Poppy, her best friend is named Tawny, which is basically another word for like a light brown. So it's like, so you named your brown character Brown. Um, Also, it just feels weird that she made the people of color in the story be like the best friends of the main characters, who are of course white, but it's like these people of color get like so close to having a main role, but like not quite. I feel like it's so you can't say that like she has like white only books. But I'm not going to give her any points for this one. Another thing that I hadn't noticed on my own read of the book, but then I saw another YouTuber's video about it, A Clockwork Reader, and I realized that that was a really good point. So in the first book, From Blood and Ash, a main kind of thing for Poppy is that she is the maiden and she is like untouchable and like obviously a virgin, blah blah blah, whatever. So she has to wear a veil. And there's a scene where Hawk, her love interest, is trying to convince her that she doesn't need to wear the veil when she's around him. And his commentary on it isn't so much of a you're beautiful the way you are or you don't need to cover up. His commentary on it is this is like restricting you and you need to be free to take this off. And in her video, she said that it reminded her of how people will tell women who wear hijabs that basically they don't respect that it's that woman's choice to wear that for religious reasons, and people tell women who wear hijabs to take it off for their freedom and think that they're not free because they're wearing this. And she said that conversation was like a little too on the nose for her. And again, that was something that had never occurred to me. But when she said it, I was like, that is a really good point. And another super uncomfortable part of this book series. And then on the almost homophobic, it's not really homophobic side, but it is very heteronormative in that males and females have mates, and there's so much about these people that are like strictly male or strictly female. Like it's very like the gender binary is very like in your face, up front. Like males are males and females are females, and they're like so different, and your mates are the opposite sex, whatever. And so it's just that kind of thing that kind of pushes the LGBT community to the side completely. And also I think at the end of the day, even disregarding how it's hurtful to the LGBT community, how it's also hurtful to the straight community, to have like, it's this fantasy world where, you know, there's such strict like gender like roles and expectations for all of these people, like beyond a way that's healthy, obviously. Then of course, as many people have said, and I'm sure many people will continue to say, there are consent issues with this book as well. For example, the first time Hawk and Poppy meet and kind of have an almost sexual encounter, they're definitely kissing, talking about doing more. They don't know who the other person is. Like Poppy like stumbles into Hawk in a dark room, or she has the veil on still, I think. In any case, he can't see her. This is in the very first book, obviously. It's the very first time they meet. And so he thinks that she is somebody else, and she has no idea who he is. And it's kind of a weird thing where like she's uncomfortable and wants him to stop, but he keeps going. And then they have a lot of encounters like that where it's like she expresses not wanting to keep going, but he keeps going anyway. It's something that I think ends up being kind of written as she has just been taught her whole life to like say no or to not want these things, but really she does, and he like just like coaxes that out of her or whatever. But I think it's a really harmful message for really obvious reasons, and if he was actually a good person, he would have respected her like saying no, or would it, or like expressing hesitation even towards what was going on between them. And this should be kind of obvious given the fact that so much of the first book focuses on her being the maiden and her being a virgin and all of these other things, but this book definitely falls into kind of the trope of once she loses her, like, her virginity is a really big deal, and once she loses it, she becomes like free, and it's like her own person and all this stuff, which again, I feel like a harmful message. She could still be a strong woman, and wait to have sex until she's more comfortable with it. It seems unhealthy to have this book geared towards, I don't want to say young adult, but definitely like new adult, like younger readers, I'm sure, are reading this, and they're like, losing your virginity shouldn't be made such a big deal. It almost seems like when, you know, she's being oppressed into being the maiden and other people are forcing her to not have sexual relations with anyone, that it's a kind of a chance for there to be a commentary about how like it shouldn't be such a big deal. But then even when she's free from that like oppressive regime, it's still a big deal. So also, Hawk and Poppy, after the first time they have sex, he basically ends up betraying her, and as she is like obviously very hurt, very angry at him, he continues to make like weird comments, like still like obviously views her through a very sexual lens, when again it's like, if you were a good person, you would recognize that you've hurt somebody who like had a lot of trust in you, and maybe you should give her some space to like get over these feelings before you try to be like flirty or something with her. Like obviously she's not going to respond well to your advances right now. And from here, I guess I only have a couple little things to nitpick on. For example, the character Poppy is really, I find, unnecessarily violent. I mean, there's a scene where she stabs Hawk in the heart, and he's one of these Atlantean like immortal beings or whatever, so this doesn't kill him, but she still tried to kill him. And it's something they continually reference throughout the series, that like, oh, she's so violent, oh, she's so like aggressive, whatever. And it's like not violent in like a quirky way, like she kills people and has absolutely no remorse over it. And in other parts of the book, you know, like when you're in her head and like she's thinking through things, she's thinking about like how she wants to be compassionate and how she can't understand like how some of the rulers are so unfair to their people, when in reality she's just as bad, because again, she'll kill people for very little reason and has no like emotional repercussions from it. There's nothing about her ever dwelling on hurting other people. And also I think it's way overdone between Poppy and Hawk. Whenever someone wrongs them in the slightest, they just talk about how painfully and slowly they're going to kill them. And then in the end, don't kill them slowly or painfully, just kill them pretty quickly. I mean, but either way, the propensity for death and killing is just a little over the top, even for like a fantasy book where you kind of expect some violence and gore. Again, just the utter lack of care from this girl for killing people is really jarring. Also, the characters will use a lot of like modern kinds of words and phrases that really took me out of the story every time they do it, because again, it's set in a fantasy kingdom and like it's kind of like medieval-esque, but they'll say like things you would expect like Gen Z to say. Like if one of the characters is saying something and like Poppy agrees with it, she'll be like, oh, same. And it's like, when people say same, I feel like that's such like a 20 teens, like 2020s like thing to say. So it like really, them having characters say something like that in this fantasy realm is really weird in my opinion. Like they can just say me too and still, you know, that would, it would have this, it has the same meaning, but it sounds less like modern here and now. And the last thing I have to nitpick on is when, so Hawk's name is not really Hawk, it's Castile, and surprise surprise, he's the prince of the Atlanteans, and Poppy has grown up thinking, being taught that the Atlanteans are like the enemies and Castile is an evil prince. Whatever, you get it. Again, spoiler in case there's anything left I could possibly not spoil. They get married, and so they become king and queen, and literally the first thing Poppy does, like the logo, it like the insignia for the kingdom is a sun with a sword and an arrow like crossed over it. And so like one of the things, like they get to Atlantia, like the first like 2 or 3 books are them getting to Atlantia, and once they're there, she sees the flag, and the sword represents the king, the arrow represents the queen, I think, and the arrow is like a little bit smaller than the sword, and she's like, I would love to change that, because the king and queen are equal. And Castile is like, you can do whatever you want, like my queen. Bleh. And that's literally, they get married, they get crowned like king and queen, and that's the first thing she does. She's like, somebody comes up to her and is like, yo, I'm your like royal whatever advisor or something now, like it's like, tell me if there's anything you need. And she's like, we're changing the logo, the arrow and the sword are going to be the same size now because the king and queen are equal. And so this lady is like, okay, dope, I'll send out, we'll get like all new flags and shit done for the country. And she's like, oh, like it's no rush, it's no big deal, I just wanted it to change. And the lady's like, no, like if this is what you want, we're gonna do it right away. And I was just thinking how like fiscally irresponsible that is, because I was like, it's gonna cost so much money to change like all the flags on your ships, all the flags on the castles, it's like on the armor of the guards and knights and stuff. And I'm like, you're gonna have to change all of that, and it's gonna cost so much money, all because you think that the arrow being a little bit smaller than the sword on the country's logo is like making you lesser than your husband. I think you have bigger, maybe deeper seated issues that you need to address rather than spending all of your new country's money on this foolishness. I think those are all my thoughts for the From Blood and Ash series. I will say, I kept saying that I was reading like the 4th and last book. On my review for the 3rd book on Goodreads, I was like on to the 4th and last book. And then I got to the end of the 4th book and realized it's not the last book. I think there's gonna be like 2 more in the series. I honestly don't know if I'm gonna be able to keep going. When I read the 1st book, I literally read it thinking I was gonna do like a rant review of it, which is where we ended up. But I didn't have like, I just didn't hate it enough. I was like, yeah, it's like a really bad book, but I still like had a good time reading it. Like it was just like mindless entertainment. But by the time I got to the 4th book, I was like, this is just straight garbage. Like I said, the 1st book, bad but entertaining. The 2nd book was kind of similar. By the 3rd book, I was kind of starting to lose steam, but I was still like invested in like where the story was gonna go. The 4th book was literally so bad. I could barely, it was hard to finish, like bad, and I spent like so much of it cringing and like laughing out loud during it, like not because it's meant to be funny, but because like the characters are just so bad and it's so cringy. And I can't imagine reading another 2 books in the series at this point. I guess whenever the next one comes out, I'll see how I'm feeling, because on the one hand, it's like I have read these 4 trash novels already, like may as well keep going so I can see how things like actually end. But on the other hand, I don't know if my sanity can take it. I like feel my IQ dropping the more I read of these books. I need I need something a little bit more advanced where like my brain has to activate to read. Um, so we'll see where I go with the series, but that's what I think of the first 4 books in the From Blood and Ash series. Thanks for watching. Bye.